So, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're watching from, whenever you're watching. Please welcome to our show, Future Journalism Today Live. And today we have a very special guest, Ezra Eeman, or Ezra Eeman, I think the English ones would pronounce. And he will be a very special guest. And Nadine is about to introduce him in a couple of moments. But hi, Ezra, nice to have you on our show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here.
Nadine, could you tell us what's in store for this next episode of Future Journalism Today Live? And by the way, viewers, please do interact. Say hi. Tell us where you're from. And if you do have any questions, things you would like to add or ask Ezra, use the chat right there, and we'll look into it and see if Ezra can and will answer your questions. But first, Nadine.
Yes, Lawrence, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's the last session of Future Journalism today for 2021. It's crazy how fast this year has gone by. I don't know about you, but I'm really I cannot believe that it's already at the brink of 2022. But anyway, it is what it is. So now we are going to have a great session with Ezra. So thank you very much for joining us today. So what I would like to do is show you our prezzo, but unfortunately I cannot get it to the screen, Lawrence. Okay. Now we are talking. So there have been a few updates in StreamYard, so we are still getting used to this as well. So excuse us if something is not working the way it's usually working. But anyway, Ezra, again, thank you very much for joining us today. Before I'll start your introduction, let's give a short introduction to the session today and what we are going to be talking about. So first of all, we are going to talk to you about what you're doing in your professional life and why you are so passionate for change in journalism and in media. Afterwards, we have the pleasure to be talking with you about a great tool that you are using, which makes your life a little bit easier work-wise. Then we will get your advice on what journalists should stop doing, but we try to make it a little bit more positive. So we get some advice from you what to do instead. And last but not least, of course, as usual, there is our great live Q&A. So everybody, if you have any questions for Ezra, please feel free to ask them right away. We are always happy to implement them into our session, but of course at the end there's going to be a live Q&A where you can ask anything else as well. Okay.
And one of our most diehard viewers and fans, Anna Maria, says hi from Amsterdam. NRC, I think it's family, Ezra, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
They're part of the Mediahuis family. That's true.
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
that's
good to
great.
have you.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, hello, Anna Maria. Great to see you again, and great that you are already using our chat as well. Okay, but yeah, if you have any questions, again, you can ask them in our live Q&A as well, and during the session too. So now we are going to be talking about you, Ezra. I hope you're okay with this, but I'm trying to make it short and sweet so you can add anything you would like to as well. But first of all, you are currently the change director at the international media company Mediahuis, as we've already heard a second ago. You are based in Brussels, Belgium, so a great place to live, I think, at least. I
always say it's a great place to leave.
To leave.
Really? You think so?
Why is that?
Because it's so central in Europe. It's really a great kind of starting hub for your journey in Europe.
I see. But I mean, you have great French fries, so that's a good thing. But yeah, of course, I mean, that's not the only reason to stay in the city. Back to your job. So as a change director, you're responsible for coordinating newsroom transformation and digital acceleration, something that every media company, of course, wants. But you are doing it across a wide range of cross-media brands as well. Previously, you've been the head of digital transformation and platforms at the European Broadcasting Union, EBU in short. And before that, you've worked as a head of innovation lab at the VRT, a Flemish public broadcaster, or the Flemish public broadcaster. And next to your main job, maybe just to add it, you're a member of a few boards as well, e.g. at the Future Media Hub. So their main goals is it to exchange technology strategies between media organizations. So trying to find the interface between different media companies. And because we are doing a live stream in different areas, let's talk about Mediahuis a little bit. So everybody knows what Mediahuis is or what type of company this is. Mediahuis is a newspaper and magazine publishing, distribution, distribution, printing, TV, radio, and online media company. So a large array of different types of media outlets, basically. It was founded in 2014 with assets in Belgium, where you are based, in the Netherlands, in Ireland, and in Luxembourg. So different media assets. Yes. For example, in Ireland, you have the Irish Independent, and in the Netherlands, you have the Telegraaf, very popular, very famous. So you are basically publishing daily newspapers, for example, in Belgium as well, and in other countries. So super broad and a lot of work, I think, for you, Ezra, as someone who's driving change. But very interesting. And as I mentioned before, you are based in Belgium, Brussels. Okay, so Ezra, I have one question for you to start. So in your Twitter bio, I've read that you are based in 3 different cities. So you are based in Geneva, Brussels, and in Tokyo, which sounds amazing because it's like the holy trinity of food, at least if you ask me. So you have the Swiss chocolate in Geneva, you have the French fries in Brussels, and you have sushi in Tokyo. Did you have some opportunity to go to other places during the pandemic, or were you stuck in Brussels?
Well, luckily enough, there was enough time to travel around in some of the periods, because since the time that I joined Mediahuis, I think 8 months ago, I've been visiting, of course, all our different offices, so in Ireland, as well as in different places in the Netherlands, as well as in Luxembourg, because we're doing a big onboarding there of our new platform. And then, of course, the different regional offices that we have in Belgium as well as our one of our providers in Denmark. I was actually on one of the first Omicron flights, I think, to Denmark from Schiphol. Yeah, that was a bit a strange experience, I must say.
Yeah, definitely. I would think that it's very difficult to be on such a trip as well. But okay, so you've had your fair share of travel. But if it would be safe, which would be, or where would be the first place you would like to go again after COVID loosening up?
Oh, definitely Tokyo. So my wife is Japanese, and last Christmas we went to Japan, and it was a horrible kind of journey to get there with the kind of paperwork, because it was normally closed for tourists, but since I'm married, it was possible. But this year we said we wouldn't do it again, because we had to quarantine 10 days in a special location, and it's just not you don't do it for your pleasure, but then again, family's there, and you actually want to reconnect with your family there, and as soon as possible, we want to go back there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can understand that you would like to see your family again, probably after a really long time too. But okay, yeah, that seems to have been a difficult experience that you've made. But I mean, thank you very much for answering this question. Of course, we are here today to talk to you about your professional life in the first place. So let's switch the topic to this again. So Ezra, you are a change director at Mediahuis. So what exactly does this mean, or how would you describe your job?
So it's a tricky title, because what's in a name change, it could mean anything. I'm part of the technology and product center, So that means that we're actually making all the applications and the websites and everything that our newsrooms are using to get their news to the audiences, as well as any of the supporting systems of the newsrooms, editors, CMSs, every tool that we make ourselves, as well as kind of the partnerships that we have with vendors, is arranged by us. And of course, if you do it across 30 plus titles, you have to start thinking, how can we do this in a rational way? Do we want to have 50 apps, or do we want to have 2, 3 that we support? So as a change director, I'm actually looking across the group, what's a good and solution for the group, for the different brands, well being aware that they all have their identities, that they really want to have their kind of journalism expressed. And since I'm working on the editorial side, it means I'm really looking in how do we want to work? How do our journalists want to work in the newsroom? What kind of new systems do they need to really produce journalism for the next generation of devices as well? If we don't want to make a print first workflow, but rather a mobile first workflow, what does that mean in terms of tooling as well as workflow, as processes, everything that comes along? Should we all try to do everything in one system, or do we have very flexible kind of plug and play thing where you can quickly adapt to new evolutions in the markets? How much do we want to share content across all these brands? Now they're different languages, but you might say with automatic translation, sharing of content in the future might be much more easy. So we have to make sure that we then enable that, because if we all have closed walls between those different entities, then it won't be possible to quickly exchange content and things like this.
And can you tell us a bit, because I think you asked quite a lot of questions just by answering Nadine's question. You say, how do you do this, and why should we go for that instead of A or B? How do you go about answering or trying to solve these sort of challenges? What is your way of directing?
Yeah. So of course, I work mainly with the stakeholders. My stakeholders are news brands, and I try to, service their journalism. How do we make sure that their journalism can be expressed in the best possible way to their audience? And from there, we have a few principles that we're kind of using in the discussions that we have. And one of them is a part of our strategy. We want to provide the best mobile experience to our user. So that alone already gives you a few hooks. It's about a mobile experience. It's about an experience for the user. Yep. So if we take decisions, we want to take that into account. Is it helping us to provide that mobile experience? Is it doing something good for the user? We also have the idea that it should be quite efficient and easy to use in the newsroom. So we won't add very complex layers of processes, because we know that is not something that our newsroom will like. So there's a few key principles that we have defined that help us make these decisions.
Like user and mobile first, and you mean these principles, or?
Yeah. So user, mobile first, modular, making sure that it's scalable, efficient workflows. We have a number of those that help to make a decision if somebody wants, for instance, an extra button here, and then we're looking, will that actually help us to deliver the outcome that we're looking for? And sometimes there is a conflict, and then we know how to resolve this.
Yeah, because I was just going to ask, what are the sort of the hardest discussions you have, or the toughest decisions? Are you able to share some of these?
Yeah, well, one that was really passionate. So we have big newsrooms and we have smaller newsrooms. I would say the bigger newsrooms have more staff to do actions, so they are more used to have workflows with different stages where different people do different parts of the job. While in smaller regional newspapers, they look for a workflow where one person potentially can do everything. So less steps, more richer input from one side and richer output to the other side, which is not necessarily the same workflow for a newspaper that has a different team for social, and a different team for the newsletter, and a different team for the pushes, and a different team for the publication. Yeah, so how do you combine those two workflows in one system? That's sometimes a challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Definitely. And Ezra, I mean, as I've just heard from what you've been saying, you must be getting a lot of feedback from your stakeholders. How do you manage the feedback from your stakeholders? How do you have a forum where everyone is telling you what he or she is needing in their daily work, or how are you managing this?
Yeah, well, we have different levels, of course, in the organization. I mainly have contacts with the digital directors of the countries, or the editors in chiefs, or the digital editors if they're available for a certain title. So, and that layer of the organization is not so big. There's not so. We only have one digital director for every country. We have of course, a limited number of editors in chiefs, or even though that's already a broader group with 30 plus titles, but that's manageable, and that's on a first name basis. And we have regular meetings where we can actually join the dots a bit deeper in the organization, where there's different digital profiles who might be in direct contact with our product owners or developers or architects or different people in the organization. But that doesn't pass through me. It would be very slow if everybody has to go through me. So there's a lot of direct connections while I'm trying to maintain the broad narrative and the strategic direction that we want to go.
And was there a change director before you, or were you the first one to?
Yeah,
embody
actually, I
this?
was the last one that joined the group. There was a change director for the B2C side, so our everything that has to do with our paywalls and how we get reader revenue. There is a change director for the B2B side, so everything that has to do with our advertisement and how we will live in Google's cookieless world. And then there is a change director for our news products as well. So I really look into our editorial part and how we work with the journalists and what they want to do. There's also a colleague of mine who looks at the apps and the websites and how the kind of products that we make.
Yeah. And so we were wondering if there were any other publishers that do have change directors on the journalism side as well, or is it sort of kind of unique for a Mediahuis to have?
It is a very specific role, because I know also from my former role, there are plenty of transformation directors or heads of transformation or digital change managers. But mostly their role is not specifically, they're not necessarily part of the product organization. They're sometimes part of business strategy, or they're part of the newsroom itself, but on a group level, from a product perspective, it's one of the few roles where I know it's a specific bridge role between editorial and the kind of product transformation that we're looking at.
Yeah, I was just wondering because you say you talk to a lot of editors in chief as well, and there might be 30 plus. So how do they refer to you when maybe some of their journalists ask, so this Ezra, what's he doing? What's his task? How do they explain your
I think
role?
they're not always clear what I do, but I'm involved so some of the things I do are very tangible. It's about introducing certain new tools, or a project that I can talk a bit later on is called Article DNA, and it has to do with how we better kind of add metadata to our articles to better understand the kind of content mix that we make. How do we publish and commission stories? That's something tangible that lands in the newsroom, and they can say, Ezra is involved in understanding how we might roll that out across the newsroom. But if you would go throughout the company and ask all the editors in chiefs, is Ezra what he's doing? They might, they might connect me to some aspects of what I do, but certainly not to everything.
No. I know you've prepared a presentation, and Nadine, maybe this could be.
I had some slides just to guide us a little bit through some of the things I've been doing, and a little bit the journey.
Exactly.
Because I've seen a bit. I didn't start as a journalist, actually, and one of the first things I wanted to show is Keanu Reeves, not so much because some people compared me to him when I was young, but Yeah, it was. I had actually long hair, like
But
not
what
like.
did you start as? Because you said I didn't start as a journalist.
I didn't start as a journalist. I started as a filmmaker.
Ah,
And
okay.
right around the time that I was in the film school, The Matrix was really hot,
Of course. Yeah.
and it reminded me, because I think the new one will come out very soon.
Yeah.
And it touches so much that one of the key questions that we're now facing about, like, what's reality and can we trust our own experiences, and is everything that we experience real, or is it part of a kind of digital simulation that we're experiencing, very close to the metaverse that we're now.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, oh, I've seen this before, like when I started studying film, and I know it was a major kind of starting point for myself, because I wanted to recreate this kind of Matrix experience, but then in reality. So one of my first works, and this is, look at me standing here, it was my my final work as a cinematographer. It was a very small piece of footage that I filmed somewhere in the south of France. You see a couple they're kind of meeting, waiting. They had a discussion. They're lingering. But the actual footage was very short, and I edited until 12 minutes, as if it was a super long, dramatic conversation. So the whole movie was manipulated. It was I kind of cut out those two characters and moved them independently. So they had a completely new fictional relationship. And at that time, it was quite a new kind of thing to do. But it was triggered by this matrix experience. Like, everything that you see can be actually manipulated.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Which was maybe a starting point as a journalist, that you manipulate reality.
Yeah.
And I mean, you didn't have the editing programs as well that you have nowadays, so it probably in 2001 it was difficult.
Frame by frame, frame by frame, rotoscope. So you could rotoscope. I mean, cut out the whole figure, and then if you had a clean background, you could then they could move independently. And then I used some morphing software to morph them from one position to another position, and it became a bizarre. But it was very early stage. I think nowadays you can do these kind of things very easily.
Do you have it somewhere? Is it up online somewhere?
Yeah, it's still online. It was archived. I won a few competitions. It was archived by the Dutch Film Institute, I think, so somewhere online.
Okay, might have to look that up. Put it in the show notes.
Or if any one of the viewers would like to go on a research hunt, maybe.
Yeah. Talking about research, that was actually the thing that then, because I ended up as an experimental filmmaker, and I can tell you there's not a lot of jobs for experimental filmmakers. So I did an extra year of journalism, and from there, because I was already working with reality and was fascinated with things in reality, I ended up as a researcher for investigative documentaries. And one of the things that helped me most at that stage was this excellent course from Daniel Russell. I don't think it's available anymore, or not for free. I think you can still find it if you pay for it, because he's retired. But at that time, he was the head of Google Search, and he was the master of search techniques. You could really learn so much from the advanced power search. And I really still think that journalists could get so much more out of Google than that they currently know. So that was one of the things that I thought worth sharing.
Two ex-teaching fellows are saying yes. You can definitely get more out of search if you know how.
And if you're lucky, you could still find this somewhere online. I think that the original course is gone, but it's still certainly somewhere available. This is one of the things that then came out of that kind of working as a researcher, is that the combination of being a cinematographer and somebody who did storyboards, I started combining my research as kind of visual research rather than just writing things down. It was mapping things with pictures and with graphs, and and that helped me a lot to kind of pre-visualize a story, to kind of see links between different parts of the story. I don't know what this tool is again, but it's one of the many mapping tools that are out there.
Yeah. So, and why does it help you to map this out visually?
Well, I think because again, I'm a visual person, and somehow I start seeing the connections. You see the connections in the story. It also generates new angles because you could you could see, okay, which of the things that they already cover, maybe there's another angle that I can explore. So by having it all in one view, this kind of visual mapping gives you, I don't know, a different way to build stories.
Is that something you tell, maybe, I don't know if you tell journalists anything, but if you tell them that this works for me, maybe, because if we talk about, say, multi-channel storytelling or something like that, then what you see more often is journalists using Post-its and literally rearranging maybe, I don't know, scenes or paragraphs or data visualizations. Then
I always try to say, like, explore things in different ways. Start with outlines, make things visual.
Yep.
And what I see is that, because this is actually an online tool, but it works even better if you can do it on live. I experience it a lot in this hybrid new environment. We're using a lot of these Miros and murals and these kind of tools, but somehow it still works if the bigger the canvas. When I used to work at VRT, and we could relocate the kind of innovation lab that we had, I explicitly asked, can you make at least one wall, one part of the room completely whiteboard? So from the floor to the ceiling, so that we have one wall that's only whiteboards, so that we can put things there, leave things there, drafts, things on a huge surface.
Definitely.
Anyway, so this was more to kind of, I evolved from being a researcher to a journalist, and then an editor in chief. And during that period, I would say, this is already 2009, but it started 2003, 2004, 5, 6, 7. That was actually also the period when social media started to become more. So suddenly you had to rethink, like, that whole publication value chain. What's the role of these new kind of these new kind of channels in that? Where do we promote? Where do we publish? What kind of forms do we need? And that's still something I feel is very much a question that's happening in every newsroom. Currently, I would say every newsroom is wondering, what should we do on TikTok? And should we have a specific format for that? And how will we ever get revenue from being on TikTok? Or how can we have a relationship with those audiences? How will they ever find what we do somewhere else? So we're still in that same kind of mechanism somehow.
Definitely. Maybe a short something that Anne-Marie said earlier on concerning the whiteboard. She says, I would love it if a journalist came with a storyboard instead of 1,500 words on paper. I think we can all agree that this would be a great idea, right?
Yeah, I would love it, but it's actually it's not necessarily easy for journalists who have not been trained in that kind of thinking. And I think we need it needs some time. At the VRT, when I was kind of head of the innovation labs there, we wanted to introduce, or there was a big request to have a more visual way of telling stories on the web, like this, because the New York Times and this whole scrollytelling was happening at that time.
We also Snowfall and the Firestorm.
So we also wanted to invent something like this. And I said, okay, let's start with making kind of visual blocks in PowerPoint. Just make blocks. Like, the easiest one was a full picture with a title on. And then we have two halves, and then we have combined views. And we made a kit like this with maybe 20 combined story blocks. and started to hand this out in the newsroom to see, okay, now if you would make that story that you've written like this, how would you do it with these story blocks? It was extremely difficult for people to master that, to go from something written to that kind of thinking.
Yeah, because you mentioned that they might not be trained like that, and I know from certain journalism schools in the Netherlands, those are the ones I know, two of them, that they've been very highly educated in design thinking and using post-its and maps and canvases and whatever, and that they sort of have to come up with creative ways of, and that they are assignments that you are not allowed to write any text, right? That could be an assignment. So they sort of train those journalists. So would that problem be solved with the new generations, you think, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think the current generation is much more visual. I was saying it yesterday to my wife. I see some of my daughter's friends who are 10, 11 years old do cinematographic cuts on TikTok with like wipes and cutaways and things like this, which took me years to kind of master.
Yeah.
They're now doing it out of the pockets with their phones and very clever kind of editing. So
yeah,
I think we're completely in a different generation there.
There are basically TikToks explaining how to do jump cuts, how to do transitions, etc. in TikTok. So it's really interesting. Yeah.
I need to like this. So, but then you said mastering the story chain, ID, research, report, publish, feedback, and feedback from the audience, or from your professional co-workers in journalism, or from
feedback
all
from
those?
The audience. And I think that was some of the thinking that started to seep in, is that social media was something that became another channel to retrieve stories, to get feedback early in the commissioning rather than at the end of a story. So and I think that connects a little bit to the reason why I went at some stage. I applied for a Fulbright scholarship and went to the US, because they just started a new course at the CUNY Graduate School, and it was called Entrepreneurial Journalism. It was Jeff Jarvis who started it there. I think Anita is now leading.
Anita Stelina, you mean?
Stelina is now
2 months
currently
ago.
leading that. But it wasn't initially. It was Jeff Jarvis who started it, and it completely intrigued me, because it started from rethinking how you could bring journalism to your audiences, but also how you evaluate journalism. And the startup scene of journalism startups in New York at that time was really interesting. There were a lot of things happening there. So I was very lucky that I could join one of the first cohorts of students and researchers that joined the program. And it infused this whole idea of business thinking, of the value that you create, of modeling, and also quickly having a kind of MVP startup idea for journalism.
And was it about the company, the organization of a new sort of journalism organization, or also as a journalist for coming up with stories or producing stories or pitching stories?
This was very much about finding new business models for journalism.
Okay. Yeah.
Understanding that certainly I think at that times the social media a new kind of it was the moment where BuzzFeed was really big and starting to create like this new kind of business model for news, and there was a realization that they needed something different in order to survive in that kind of world. So a lot of new ideas came up.
And not just listicles, but also those they had the recipes, right? Which the New York Times is now very big on, I think, with recipes and the Wirecutter.
There was a boom of hyper-local websites at that time.
Yeah.
Like everything had to be hyper-local.
Yeah.
So all these new things were happening, and I was super fascinated. Unfortunately, when I came back in Europe, I was still working at VTM. I was a bit ahead of the curve, and people were wondering, what are you trying to do? There's no money in the internet. And
I was just wondering, because it's so great that you're sort of highlighting all these sort of things from the not too distant past. But what do we learn from all these changes? Just, I don't want to be too philosophical here, but maybe you might have an answer.
Well, for
in
For me, it's
journalism?
also always about different lenses to look at journalism, and all of these for me are different lenses. I started with that lens of the cinematic lens and the
Exactly,
storytelling,
yeah.
and how that influenced me. Then you have the whole search and the kind of deep search that goes way into the privacy of people, and how that also influenced the kind of stories that were told. I would say this whole social media landscape, and that the explosion of channels and ways to reach your audience, as well as the kind of audience that looks back and even generates content themselves. And then the realization that we had to rethink the way we operate and the rethink the way we our business models. And what followed afterwards, of course, was, yeah, this is something else, but was the realization of new ways of approaching journalism itself, like as a product, as a, not anymore as just content, but as a product or as a service that you needed to deliver.
Yeah. But you say different lenses, like different perspectives, or is it a bit different still, different lens to look through at your own profession in a way? Or
for me, a lens means that if you look at journalism as being pure content, it's a different lens than if you would say it's also a service, or it's also a product, or it's also and so you shift your perspective on how you create. If you say user first perspective, that's a different kind of thinking. If you would say that storytelling and even fiction could be a way to talk about reality, that again is a new perspective. Like and that's something I see now as well.
Yeah, but I can imagine it's a principle to work with if you're talking about change in a newsroom or change in journalism, that you say it's just another lens. So say the metaverse or a podcast or TikTok. These are all maybe different lenses to look at journalism. Or
I use that that lens because it helps sometimes people to see that what you're looking at is not necessarily changing. It's the way you look at it that's changing.
Yeah, interesting.
And it also feels like a tool, like it's something you can manipulate and you can play with and you can alter, but it's not necessarily changing who you are. It's not necessarily changing what you want to talk about. It's changing just the approach and the way you talk about it, or the way you approach it.
And sometimes the product is very similar to another one, but it has like a different approach. I mean, if you have the example of radio features, for example, like, reporting on radio, which is not on demand, such as a podcast, for example, but still it is a very similar approach at the end of the day, but a different type of distribution, for example, or availability, because it's not like sent out once from the radio station and then it's gone for the day and maybe appearing the next day again, but a podcast is like available anytime. But still, the way you are approaching it is very close to a radio feature concerning podcasts and radio features.
I think that's the whole idea of linear versus non-linear, of pull versus push, all these kind of things that changes the way you build a story, that might change the way people interact with it, the expectations that they have. And this is everything that you need to take into account, because one of the things I've included here, so I've at some time when I was in CUNY, I was meeting and hearing new tools and new kind of startups every day, and it was just too much for me to kind of keep up with, because I also learned to code there, and I did data visualization, and I did mobile storytelling, and there were so many new apps. So I started pinning them on Pinterest. So and quickly I saw like, oh, this is a nice way to actually collect them. So I made these kind of icons so I could group them as collections of tools.
Yeah.
And then I started tweeting about them, and of course, because Jeff and a few other people were also there, it quickly became some kind of very popular account that a lot of journalists started to follow, and then I felt obliged to to start running it. But it became a really great kind of stepping stone into a new career, because it opened doors to festivals, it opened doors to new partnerships. I got funding to do a website for journalism tools. So there was a lot of new opportunities that actually happened through this very innocent collection of new tools that I was encountering at the school.
Yeah, cool. And again, it's very, very visual. You used Pinterest to make sense and to.
Yeah, I need to. Yeah. You will see as well, like this storytelling canvas is because you talked about how does it influence the tool, how does it influence your story, and this was one way when I did lectures about the new tools. It's like, how do you select the tool? And I was like, what are some of the story elements that you have? What's the time that you have to create the story? What are your skills? Are you a beginner? Are you very skilled? Which platform do you work for? Is it the mobile? Is it the web? Would it be a watch? What kind of interaction do you expect? What's the price that you have in mind? So there were different elements, and the kind of reaction that you wanted to have once you applied that tool. And I still think it's very relevant if you have new tools to consider these elements.
To take the time for this,
Great.
I think I'm passing through my slides, and I'm arriving at the time where I stopped being pure journalist and became much more an innovation person and somebody looking at the organization. And at VRT started by I took some of the learnings that I had in the States and started to think about user first working, creating personas for products that we had much more in design thinking. And we brought this design thinking as well in the newsroom floor. And that was a very nice project, actually. It was these very simple test cards where we said, we believe that creating longer headlines will work better than shorter headlines. And we will test it by creating longer headlines for a few weeks. And then we will measure this by measuring the outcome of these articles in this way. And we are right if we see result X, if we see that there's an increase of our reach, whatever, after so many weeks. And by making that very visual and having a wall with these experiments, the whole newsroom could follow what we were currently testing and doing. So it became a very low and easy exercise for the newsroom floor.
And everyone, great overview.
Yeah, and you were transparent as well, because everyone could see what this team was doing, why they were doing it, and when.
Yeah, that was one of the conditions I said, because the editor-in-chief asked, "Can you help?" They wanted to consolidate it to 3 newsrooms, so the radio one, an online one, and a TV one, and they had this big change project. And I said, "Do you want to facilitate this somehow?" And I said, "Just give me a space in the middle of the newsroom, where I can bring in some of the people of your teams, different teams, and we'll do design sprints the whole time. And we'll take a big whiteboard and we'll announce what we're doing, and we show the results." And after a while, people started knocking on our door and asked, like, "Can we try this once, or can you do something for us?" And it became a very positive thing in the middle of the newsroom.
Yeah. And that's something you said you specifically wanted as a criteria, to have it in the middle of the newsroom. Yeah.
I wanted to have in the middle of the newsroom, and I also said I wanted to have a commitment from every editor-in-chief of at least, I think, 1 person from each unit. So 1 radio person, 1 online person, and 1 TV person. And on top of that, a few extra profiles, so that everybody was a little bit, there was some skin in the game. They couldn't just say, "Oh, we're not invested. This is something from innovation." They needed to kind of be in it.
And to own it as well.
Yeah, a bit of an obligation. Yeah.
And which year was this again? I'm really I feel like I'm like Nadine and I and our viewers are really sort of sitting front seats in this sort of very special.
This was 2015, I think.
So we got a couple of years to go until we arrive in the future, right?
Yeah. I think these are some of the formats that we started then introducing, which are now quite common. But at that time, like these very visual, small stories and infographics and videos were not so common yet, and
Yeah.
we created the tools to automate this all. So
Yeah.
everything was automated.
Ah.
Then 2017, I moved to the EBU, where things got on a different level, because it was not so much more innovation of newsrooms or in newsrooms, but how do we transform organizations? And so it became at the organization level, a bit the level that I'm more at now. And I think the realization there, and that was a very nice one, was also, again, how do we look differently to public broadcasters and public companies than maybe commercial newsrooms? And again, having a different lens to look at transformation, where we might not be looking at revenue, but we want to generate impact, which is a different thing. We're not really working for consumers, but maybe more for audiences or people that are
Citizens, maybe, or
citizens. Yeah. So again, I use that image of the lens to look differently at transformation. And we said, citizens, and instead of business value, we need social value. Instead of the target markets, because a commercial company can just say, I just want those high earners. Public service media needs to be universal, and then impact instead of revenue. And I think I'm trying to bring some of that thinking now back to, again, a more commercial background, because I think it's relevant for commercial companies as well.
But it's also, looking at this very interesting diagram or illustration, I would say that it seems like it's also a bit about the same conversation that people are having, especially in Europe, I would say, when it comes to regulating big tech or thinking about the future of AI. With all these these big lawsuits going on, but also about the values, and then talking in Europe about regulation and citizen social value, universality.
Yeah. So that's why I feel like
it's like Europe versus the United States in a way. A bit.
European companies could very well be here in the public service media column and say, we really want to create social value. Actually, Mediahuis is very much about their core mission is about enabling journalism for society. That's really what they want to do. So that's in the core of their mission.
Yeah.
So, and then I'm actually at where I'm now, shaping the future newsrooms at Mediahuis. So we talked already about that, and I brought two projects. One of them which is a tool that I can highlight a bit.
Article DNA, you say, right?
This article DNA, I can highlight it before the rhetoric one. I just thought it's a current project that we're working on, especially our data people. So, but I'm helping them to bring this to the newsrooms, and it's about, like, every article has a DNA, and it has a certain genre. It answers a certain user need. It has certain data inherent in it. Has maybe a certain tonality. And if you start understanding that DNA and start understanding what readers want at some given point of day, you can commission in a different way. So you can use that DNA to improve your mix, or to change your mix, or to work in a more granular way with your content.
And this is all about metadata, you said earlier, right? Is it also about automation with machine learning, or is it human?
It is partly automated, so by AI that really analyzes the text, and that would look at IPTC categories and tonality of text, and could do a gender scan to see if we're representing, if we're diverse enough in these articles. There's a part that's also handled by the newsroom, and that has more to do with what genre is this, or is this something that appeals more to the heart or more to the head? Is it more something that's for me or for the group? And these kind of things that are hard for a machine now to currently, that's things that we place on top with the editorial staff.
Yeah, and if you develop something like Article DNA, do you have some certain pilot titles, like maybe in Ireland or in Belgium, in mind, or do you know that
this is not something that we will roll this out in a very gradual way. We're currently testing this with some of our Belgian newsrooms. We're currently testing this with one newspaper in the Netherlands. and we will gradually experiment because it needs adoption. It's an extra step for some of these handlings in a newsroom, and again, we have to see how fluently, how much, because it's an ID, but we also need to see what's the value, the real value that we can get out of it down the road. But I'm very enthusiastic about it.
We have a question again from Anne-Marie. Is it funded by GNI? Because it says GNI.
Well, Article DNA is a really big project, and a part of it, a specific part of it called Content Mix, is partly funded by Google.
Okay, Content Mix, yes.
Thanks for your question.
Yeah. So
and then was it. This is the tool that I brought for today. It was rhetoric, so that's the end of my presentation, actually.
Well, thank you for guiding us through all these years of change in journalism, for sort of giving us this sort of bird's eye view and your personal experience with all those different eras, I would say, in journalism. And it only started in 2003, right? From your Master of Cinema up until...
in 2001. Because I think,
sorry,
99 was The Matrix, and then 2 years later I graduated with my own Matrix.
The 20 years of change in journalism. That was really, interesting. And now there's a new thing coming up for the future, right?
Yeah, I have this tool from Rhetoric that I can share. It's another presentation. It's very short, but I think it's really interesting, and it's very, very much. We're not doing this alone. This is a real group effort from different companies, but it's really valuable, and it's all about these kind of things that we saw, that more and more news companies don't want to have commenting on their site anymore. Sorry, this is in Dutch, but actually it's about some of the titles saying we don't want to have comments anymore because they're just too rude and they're not really helpful, and it's just getting noisier and noisier. And then conversation moved to social media, where they might be even worse.
Yeah.
So we thought it's really worth to look into how we can still have good conversations and meaningful conversations and commenting on our websites. These are some of the partners that we're currently working on it. And the thing is very simple in the end, that there's few stages before you can actually react. So one of the things is that you get a statement, and then you can indicate if you agree or disagree with it. So there's not directly commenting. It's a first evaluation of what you think about a certain thing that's related to an article.
Yeah.
You can then give input, but you will get directly live feedback about your language that you're using. So it would say the language that you're currently using is actually, it's not very nuanced, it's not very nice, or you might hurt some people, and that's already helping for people to adjust what they're writing, because they get this kind of live feedback. Then you get similar comments, and then you can indicate, it's optional, but you can indicate if that's aligned or not aligned with your view. So again, it helps to reflect, is my argument actually similar to other arguments, as well as getting arguments that are countered, that are different than yours. So you could also agree or disagree with some of the opinions of others. So you see that you're very similar or very different than other opinions. And in the end, you get also a kind of feedback on the impact of your comments. If you're part of the eens-met, so you agree, then you're in the 44% of people that agreed, or you disagree. And the first results show that it not only incentivizes a lot of people that normally wouldn't comment, but it also improves people like this way of commenting, and it, of course, it makes that the commenting itself is much more thoughtful and much less from kind of direct anger or direct emotion.
And to get this right, you've already experimented with this in the wild.
Yeah, this has been in our life in some of our newspapers. And the experimental phase is closed, and we're now looking into how we might implement this.
I'm just wondering about the hypothesis card for this experiment. right? That you showed earlier from the news hub. If it's getting these numbers, then we consider it a success.
Yeah. We would have to say, okay, now if we want to implement in the product, it needs a different step, and we would need
Yeah.
to say like, we believe that by using this module will improve our ways of commenting, and we'll measure this by some of the so we would do maybe some CSAT scores, or
Yeah.
we would do the app scores, or we would make part of the module how happy are you with this way of commenting. So there's ways to interrogate as
Yeah.
well as also looking at the numbers of comments that we get this way.
And it's interesting that you try to get the comment section back again. I know a lot of newsrooms are doing that. And Nu Jij from nu.nl in the Netherlands, Colin van Hoek, who is responsible for their renewed comment section again, he told me that because they use machine learning to approve or decline comments, and they also tell you if it's a toxic or a rude or a remark that's not really sort of welcome to the conversation. Then he said, because we're able to, your second step, I would say, we already see that people are having better conversations because the comments get approved or declined faster, so people could actually see and could actually reply to one another. But on the other hand, it also helps their journalists get more information out of these conversations. So sometimes they can get follow-up contacts or information which you can follow up on.
Yeah.
But also they're actively engaging their readers, their audience, to participate. Is that something you do with Rhetoric as well? Do you actually invite people to add their comments or to reply to an article?
So the ideas, of course, that we still have to implement this. The idea will also be that it might be connected to the login, so that way we can also have a follow-up conversation with these people.
Yeah, exactly. Because I learned that you said, because I don't know what time that was, around maybe 2012 or 14, that all newsrooms decided to put their conversations on social media, because it was they couldn't sort of moderate it anymore because it would take up too many resources. But one of the other things I learned is that most journalists didn't really care about the conversation that were going on underneath their articles. They weren't sort of involved in those conversations. And now this is a sort of new thinking, maybe a new lens in your vocabulary.
And I must say, if we do this, it will be also much more consciously, in the sense that you don't open this for any articles. You do it, you apply it at certain articles where you think this is where we think we need to open a comment section, or we want to engage debate. You don't do it for every traffic accident and whatever update.
So you have to think about the right topics and the right the right sort of engagement.
And then it's much more manageable as well, because then you can say, okay, now we will monitor this conversation. By the way, this tool will be currently, the consortium is looking for new organizations that are interested and want to explore it as well. So it's a very open thing.
And will it be open source too, or is it something for Mediahuis only?
No, it's not specifically for Mediahuis. It's part of the consortium. The way how it will be offered to other companies, that's still something that needs to be discussed. But currently, it's open for. They're looking for other organizations who might be interested. So.
Yep. Well, thank you for showing us this tool, Ezra. And it's almost 9 p.m. here in the.
That went fast.
In this part of Europe. So Nadine, do you have anything you would like to ask? Or
no, thank you so much, Ezra. I think this was a really great overview, and I really like the idea of rhetoric as a new tool to implement in newsrooms. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people interested in using and adapting such a great feature to their comment sections. But something I'm interested in is your advice, Ezra. So before we end our session, let's do our stop and journalist. Thank you.
We always have this small banner I show, but maybe we should just do it right. We show it like this. So stop the journalist. Ezra's advice to journalists, because we try to sort of switch to a more proactive or constructive note instead of stop it.
Yeah, well, I don't want to be too harsh, but I would say stop claiming too much that you exactly know what your audience wants. I hear it in a lot of newsrooms. They say, "But you don't have to tell me what my audience wants. I already know it." And I would say maybe start with assumptions or hypotheses and say, "I think, I believe."
Yeah.
That this is what, and then try to validate it with data, try to see if you're right, and grow from there, rather than always having this attitude of I already know it. I don't need to be told. I don't need to listen. I don't need to measure things because I already know.
I think that's a
Okay.
great piece of advice, and they can rewatch this episode and look at your hypothesis card, right, to know how
Yeah,
to
well,
formulate this.
exactly, and that's a very simple way to do it. Everybody can write it down on a small card. So
Yeah. Yeah,
Definitely.
thank you once again, Ezra, for taking you down your sort of journalism memory lane for these last 20 years.
thank
It's
you.
been really a joyful and an insightful experience. And yeah, and if people want to ask you or want to know anything, how can they reach you best? Is it via Twitter or LinkedIn or all these channels?
I would say LinkedIn is the easiest way. You can always find me there. The thing is also, if you Google me with some Google tricks, you will find easily my my details. I'm not so well hidden. So.
Okay. Well,
Okay, great.
thank you for your insights, Esther, once
Yeah,
again.
and have a really good end of the year. I really hope everybody as well, if who's watching, take time for your family, enjoy it, because we don't know what's coming. So
Exactly. That's some
True.
fair
Definitely. Yeah.
word. And with that, my dear viewers, we would like to welcome you back in the next year, and we'll let you know who will be our next guest. But today, thank you, Ezra. Thank you, Nadine. And thank you, viewer.
Thanks so much.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great end of the year, everybody.
And